Are we doing this? Gotta be all slutty. I need to look like I'm in a basement. My dear audience, welcome back. If you're new here, hello, I'm Chris, and I want to bring you science. I want to bring you science. I want to bring you a scientific look at some of the things that are happening right now all around you that you may not... Okay, everyone is noticing conspiracy theories nowadays, either because you believe them or not, but everyone knows conspiracy theories are a thing nowadays, today. 2026. In the year of our Dark Lord Satan, 2026. Conspiracy theories. Again and again and again. Never mind. I want to bring you science. I want to bring you what science says about conspiracy theories. I want to bring you what science says about a variety of shit. Because I think it's important. I think it's important to communicate science. I think it's important for me to do my due diligence to bring you, the audience, facts, a little bit of my opinions, but they are obviously being caveated as such. I obviously make a comment that this is just something is my opinion. But otherwise, I want to bring you facts, I want to bring you science, I want to bring you what research says about certain topics that I find interesting or important to talk about. As I've mentioned, it is the year of our Dark Lord Satan 2026, and yet we still have to talk about conspiracy theories. Why? Because people still believe in them. Worse, they are actively spreading them. Even worse, some are directly benefiting from them, making money on the vulnerable. I wanted to say gullible, but I don't think that's fair. The problem is deeper than just gullibility, but we'll get to that. As with most of my videos, I try my best to give you factual information, verify content, and based on real, legitimate science. And that takes time and effort, so it would mean the world to me if you subscribe, like, maybe even commented on the video with suggestions on what topics you would like me to cover. It's not costing you anything to do some clicky action, but helps me a ton. And it's important we talk, engage in conversation, and Satan knows I am struggling with that. In order to talk about conspiracy theories, we need to establish what they actually are. If you see it, you probably can spot something off about what someone says, like 9/11. The report published on why the towers collapsed seems to cover everything, and yet there's people saying it was a regular demolition staged by the government. Well, 9/11 is in itself a whole mine of theories, and we'll not be examining every conspiracy theory that's out there. This is not a debunking video. This is a video on how conspiracy theories work and what science has to say on them as a whole. Have I defined what they are? No? Figures. So, let's get going. According to a 2018 article from the European Review of Social Psychology, a conspiracy theory is an attempt to get to the fundamental cause of significant economic or political events. But wait, there's more! In order to uncover secret plots by powerful and or malicious groups. It shouldn't come as a surprise that we are not the first generation to experience this type of behavior or want to uncover secrets behind events that may be in themselves so tragic that we just cannot stand the simplest explanations. There are very well documented conspiracy theories revolving around the fire of ancient Rome. Theories contemporary to Nero. And yes, some of them, I mean, conspiracy theories as a whole, some of them are real. And we'll get to that. The first person to professionally tackle the subject was the philosopher Karl Popper, who was against conspiracies that human history is an effect of deliberate actions by powerful people rather than the outcome of random and or systemic factors. Popper saw this play out in Germany, where Nazis wanted to replace one perceived conspiracy, which was that Jews rule the world, and instead put forward a theory of their own descent from the Aryan race and create the 1,000-year-long Reich. One of the more influential research papers, a sociologist by the name of Goertzel in 1994 explored how conspiracy theories may be appealing to particular ethnicities or minorities, and that conspiracy theories can develop into a distinct and self-sustaining mindset. In the first half of the 90s, the New York Times conducted a nationwide survey on conspiracies. In 1992, around 10% of Americans believed that Lee Harvey Oswald was the only person involved in the JFK assassination. 77% believed others were involved, and 12% didn't have an opinion or otherwise declined to answer. Other interesting statistics from the time showed the following. Many black people and members of the gay community believed that the AIDS epidemic was deliberate, instigated by the government. 35% of church members surveyed by the Southern Christian Leadership Council believed AIDS is a form of genocide, and 30% were unsure. A government-created virus conspiracy? Huh. I think I've heard that one before. 34% believed AIDS was a man-made virus, and 44% were unsure. Specialists at the time, mind you, the paper was released in 1994, found no evidence that the AIDS epidemic was deliberate, but many black people were skeptical and remember the Tuskegee syphilis experiments of 1932 to 1972. And for those of you who don't know what that was, let me tell you, it's a doozy. 399 black men were engaged in a medical study by the Tuskegee Institute, and an additional 201 as a control group. The 399 men had latent syphilis. The control group obviously had not. They were all recruited with the promise of free medical treatments and funeral expenses covered. These men came from poverty, from Alabama, so you may already see that something fucky was up. Did I mention that the men had never received, or actually were never told that they had syphilis? Or that they wouldn't actually get treated for syphilis? They were subject to irrelevant procedures, or ones that had little to do with their ailments. The study was financed by the Public Healthcare Service, so the predecessor of the CDC. No treatment, just a steady decay of their health over the course of 40 years, despite the fact that by 1947, penicillin, which was a way to tackle syphilis and mitigate it, was already widely available. As a result, 28 patients died directly due to syphilis, another 100 died of complications induced by syphilis, 40 of the men's wives got infected, and 19 children were born with congenital syphilis. The experiment got shut down only after a leak to the press in 1972 and was immediately called the most unethical medical experiment in US history, putting it mildly. They were compensated, and their families were compensated in a 1974 settlement, and in 1997 Clinton officially apologized for the whole thing. Going back to Goertzel, as of 1991, the belief that Bush Sr. delayed the release of prisoners held by Iran till the end of the elections in 1980 was still prevalent. Among others were a conspiracy of Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas, or that the government was distributing drugs to minority communities, or that the Air Force was covering up UFOs, or that the FBI killed Dr. Martin Luther King. Goertzel wanted to create a baseline of how prevalent beliefs in conspiracy theories were in general. He found it to be significantly correlated with 2. 3-step metrics. The first set consisted of the believing that the average person's situation is getting worse, that it's barely fair to have a child, and that most officials aren't interested in the average person. The second set measured trust towards the police, their neighbors, or their relatives. The findings also showed that it was more common for Black people or Latino people to believe in conspiracies. There was also evidence pointing to a monological belief system, which in short is a way of thinking where everything is connected in such a way that counter evidence to one thing becomes automatically evidence for another. And so you can just run in circles because disproving one conspiracy theory becomes proof of a different one. Also, conspiracy enthusiasts were more prone to believe more theories should they already believe one theory, and it was easier for them to accept a new one the more they already believed. And if you make a drinking game of this video, each time I say conspiracy or theory, you will not last long, my friends. Don't do it, you will die. Also, members of racial groups were also more likely to believe conspiracies that affected them more than other groups, like the AIDS epidemic among Black people, because they still remembered how they were treated in the Tuskegee experiment. More like the Tuskegee atrocity to me, but that's not how they are officially calling it. Just saying. It comes as no surprise that conspiracy theories are, well, in the way of adopting evidence-based decisions by the people or different walks of life. Medical sciences, environmental sciences, social sciences, in many ways are being held back by conspiracy theories. And it is difficult to legislate for the protection of the climate if enough climate change deniers vote into office people who just grift off the backs of people who, I need to add, are in vulnerable positions. People who the systems that were meant to prepare them for adulthood failed them. There has been surprisingly little research done on psychological functions of conspiracy theories. Moscovici is the most prominent example of an attempt to tackle this side of the topic when he argued in 1987 that conspiracy theories cultivate a specific mentality that is based on fears and or antipathies towards specific groups, like an in-group versus an out-group dynamic. Early research portrays believers as irrational and or delusional, not in the clinical sense delusional, right, like we say delulu. What's more, they have been characterized as mistrustful, powerless, uncertain, and anxious. But of late, researchers are steering away from the pathologizing language when talking about conspiracy theories, about conspiracy theory believing people. Rather than that, scholars are trying to demonstrate that conspiracy theories are a way of putting together inconsistent beliefs and projections into something that will make sense for them. Being still in the field of social psychology, researchers describe laypeople as prone to anthropomorphize events and objects in a way that gives them intentionality or agency, as if seeing sunshine during a storm is a sign of some sort, rather than just coincidence. This particular situation depends on the person experiencing it. If you are just walking in a storm because you were caught by surprise and the sun suddenly shines on you through the clouds, you may think nothing of it. But if a person who is experiencing some kind of hardship and is caught in a storm by surprise, regardless of personal belief, may think there has to be something looking out for me when that beam of sunshine reaches them. And in 2004, the scholar Barrett argued that the human brain is hardwired for agency in its environment, and that this is a product of evolution. One of the experiments was focused on measuring something they called the anthropomorphism scale. Said scale would measure how prone people are to give agency to objects that are otherwise inanimate. like shapes randomly flying in and around of the frame, and respondents would assign agency to them in the way that they move, like chase, run away, etc. So the scale allowed researchers to assess how prone the people were to assign human qualities to these objects. Then they correlated the scale results with demographic factors like education. Finally, the combination of the above allowed to predict the belief in conspiracy theories. And I have a personal point of contention with this experiment. People form relations with objects on a number of occasions or factors. They can assign agency to objects as a trauma coping mechanism, or due to neurodevelopmental conditions. Satan knows how I got attached to objects in the past, and how I am unable to go to certain places or even look at certain things without a panic attack, simply because I formed a kind of attachment or a kind of relation or assigned some kind of agency to a given object or place. And also I may have held certain beliefs because of trauma, because my brain desperately needed to make sense of the things that were happening. Side story, I was in group therapy for suicide ideation, and during one of the sessions, another patient told me I had cancer. I had cancer because I failed in my previous relationship as a man. Horrible association. Same pattern searching mechanism. Scholars in general, across disciplines, point to, as was mentioned before, a need to make things make sense. They look not only at social cognition, as per the before, but also at pattern perception. Experiments that were designed for the purpose showed that higher levels of pattern perception, regardless of whether the pattern was real or not, was positively correlated with the belief in conspiracy theories and or the supernatural. In the course of other experiments, researchers found that people in general were more likely to choose an explanation from a variety of existing ones or presented to them instead of making one up from nothing. People were also more likely to believe in conspiracy theories as they were to connect events that were otherwise objectively unconnected. They created impossible links, and more likely they were to do it, the more likely they were to believe conspiracies and the magical or superstitious. Another experiment showed more or less the same thing, but this time people were asked if they can create a relation of causality between two statistics, like release of a new Nicolas Cage movie and dying in a swimming pool. And the more likely they were to find a causal link between the two, the more likely they were to believe that, for example, 9/11 was an inside job, or that Princess Diana faked her own death to live out her life away from the public eye. They were also more likely to see a connection even when someone only casually mentioned there might be one. Goertzel also found something he called a monological belief system, which, as I mentioned before, which basically means that if someone believes one conspiracy theory, they will believe others, and that they mutually reinforce one another through a correlation. Like, if 9/11 was an inside job, that would mean that the government is hiding other truths from the public, like who really killed JFK. And even if presented with two contradictory theories, like Princess Diana faking her death and that the royal family had her killed, and obviously she cannot be alive and dead at the same time, that would be superseded by the more general belief in a cover-up, again reinforcing the conspiracy way of thinking. And there was also this, but it was done in the 60s and also based on psychodynamic theory, which is based on psychoanalysis, and also I am biased towards psychodynamic theory, so I'll just give you this and encourage you to look it up yourselves if you're really interested in this approach to conspiracies. I mean, go ahead, but I'm not going to entertain this part. Out of everything that I've read, this is the only part I'm leaving out, and I admit to it. Go look it up yourselves. I don't fuck with psychodynamic. But going back to a more interesting approach, people were also examined for their own morality. Meaning, if someone's morality dictated they would act in a certain way, they were more likely to believe that someone else has done it. Here's a quote: "A person's perception that I would do it informs their perception that they did it." The question of one's morality was also put to the test in different experiments, where the higher someone's moral compass was, the less likely they would believe in conspiracies. And that is because their individual morality dictated that they themselves would not participate in a conspiracy. Also, the less critical thinking skills one had, the more likely they were to believe in conspiracies, and that all put together shows that people utilize conspiracy theories to organize the chaotic world around them. So that covers more or less the experimental part of this research. Of the research I found. There are issues with the above mentioned experiments, and the authors of the paper acknowledge them. Some of the people recruited for the experiments were students, so people whose brains are active and plastic and more prone to be analytical. The samples were not huge either, in at least some of them. And I am mentioning this to be transparent, which is, I find, one of the most important factors in creating trust, but not blind trust. Anyway, moving on. We also need to examine the whole thing from a motivational standpoint with 3 distinct motivations, these being epistemic, existential, and social. Epistemic motives. This refers to a need of understanding one's environment, the world around us, and aims at building a coherent worldview. It has to be consistent, has to be stable and accurate. We have a need to find meaning in uncertainty, order in chaos, and safety when we don't have enough information. We want to defend our beliefs when presented with counter-information. In the context of conspiracy theories, when someone is trying to debunk them, they themselves become part of the conspiracy, which we can observe, for example, with most of them, to be honest. When someone is saying the Earth is round, they are part of the global plot to hide the truth of a flat Earth, planet, disk, or whatever. Or if you say you can go to the South Pole and observe how the sun doesn't set, they have been paid off by the conspirators. The notion is stronger among people who see patterns in coincidences, especially among people who believe in the paranormal or supernatural. Also when mundane explanations offer to big-scale events, like hurricanes are created thanks to weather-altering lasers. We have hurricanes, we know how they are formed, and but space lasers. Existential motives. The second part. Conspiracy theories may feel threatened by whatever conspiracy they believe, and by putting their belief in a conspiracy gives them a feeling of safety when feeling threatened in the way that they already know what's going on, or that they can detect cheating or lying agents. I have no idea if I could have made this sentence any longer. They may believe they are equipped with a truth detector of sorts, and a means to even neutralize threats, like vaccines, which I am talking about in detail in my vaccine video, which may or may not be up yet. You'll know when you see a over 2 hour video on my channel. This especially takes effect when people feel anxious or otherwise powerless. I think it should go without saying that this empowers them and gives them the agency that they feel they are lacking. So now you see how motivated people can be when it comes to believing conspiracy theories. They feel threatened, and they find a way to neutralize the threat. Social motives. This feeds to the desire to belong and to keep a positive face of themselves or the in-group. It pushes blame onto others, kind of like a sign of Red Pill. A sign of Red Pill is accusing women of their own inadequacies. It keeps the group competent and moral, but constantly being attacked by malicious agents. People of low status, due to being of a specific ethnicity or income, are more prone to believe in conspiracy theories, corroborating what Goertzel argued in 1994. I have another point of contention here. The paper from the Association of Psychological Science, titled The Psychology of Conspiracy Theories, argues here that this notion removes culpability for their poor position and shifts the blame away from the in-group. It's a defense mechanism. And as much as I do agree with the defense mechanism part, putting it side by side with low status due to income or ethnicity to me stinks of colonialism and capitalism. Let me explain. No one in their right mind would or should argue that there isn't systemic racism built into the US system of governments. It should be plain as day, as we have a multitude of evidence to support this. So when they say that if black people are more prone to believe in conspiracies aimed against them, as a way to shift blame for their position is reinforcing the mentality that they themselves are responsible for their position. Which in some cases may be true, I cannot generalize, but in the vast majority they actually are victims of red tape or of racism, of ghettoification, like other ethnic groups, as if they weren't marginalized over the years, centuries even. So implying that using conspiracy theories as a way to shift blame from their poor outcomes is like implying that they are responsible for their outcomes 100% and that they are that it's a cope and they are using a so-called victim card, which in the vast majority I don't agree with and I think is bullshit. A slightly different approach to motivation somewhat overlaps, but also makes a bit different predictions. We can distinguish a motivation to be unique, a motivation to justify the system, and a motivation for safety and security. The need for uniqueness predicts the likelihood of believing in conspiracy theories. In the course of experiments, it was revealed that people who believed in them were more likely to admit to having limited knowledge of the events they conspire about. What's interesting was that inducing the need for uniqueness resulted in higher conspiracy beliefs. How it was induced you can find here. There's no point in me referring the experiment to you at this point. Justify the system. People see conspiracy theories as empowering in challenging the status quo. Theories provide alternatives to official narratives. Other scholars referring to the same motivation find conspiracy theories to be counterproductive. Okay, as if conspiracy theories were productive in the first place. Okay, they kinda are, but we'll get there, and let's not jump the gun just yet. Further, putting people down by pushing helplessness or scapegoating a perceived enemy, like Jewish people in Nazi Germany, by the Nazis. According to the justification theory, the blame for all what's wrong with a given system is pushed on outgroups. Safety and security. This offers a little bit different light on existential needs through the lens of attachment styles. The goal of attachment is to offer a release from anxiety and increase the sense of security. Attachment styles, like avoidant, anxious, and secure, are formed in early childhood, and depending on how caregivers behave, these styles can continue into adulthood and have a detrimental effect on a person's relations. I had no idea, but social psychologists apparently are able to make predictions around intra-group dynamics based on these styles, including sexism, discrimination, and cooperation versus running away. An anxious attachment stylist looking for safety is sensitive to threats and exaggerates them. Secure and avoidance styles are more resilient and tend not to exaggerate threats, and in the course of experiments they identified that the anxious style predicted conspiracy theory belief, whereas the other two did not. It was also found that conspiracy theories were more associated with right-wing authoritarianism, social dominance, and the belief that the world is in constant war between good and evil. So if you have an anxious attachment style, who are more prone to believe in conspiracy theories and fall into authoritarianism. And as such, conspiracy theories have been a means to upkeep a positive in-group image, are politically motivated, or rather through political ideology, and people just believe the conspiracies that benefit them or their in-group. It is also interesting that people were more accurate in predicting other people's behaviors in response to conspiracy theories than they were to be aware of their own behaviors. So the influence on your own behavior is actually quite subtle. It also turned out that if people are first presented with facts, they become significantly less likely to believe in conspiracy theories afterwards, like learning about viruses, biology, and vaccines in school inoculates you. See what I did there? Inoculates you to anti-vax rhetoric. And if one is to first be exposed to conspiracy theories and later presented with facts, it is significantly more difficult to change that person's mind, because one conspiracy theory means there probably is more, and they reaffirm each other, creating an infinite loop built on little to no factual evidence, the whole shebang discussed earlier. There is also one more avenue that I want to address, namely if conspiracy theories are adaptive or maladaptive, and if pareidolia has anything to do with this, like how much of our pattern recognizing brains can be evolutionarily justified, etc. And I don't even have a clear-cut hypothesis on this, and honestly, I need to consult someone on this topic first. So whenever that moment comes, I'll be doing a part 2 to this video, because I need to think and talk to people and read more. Epilogue. Conspiracy theories are a far more complex topic than anyone may have anticipated. Later research corroborates earlier studies, and the whole thing should be further studied across the humanities and social psychology. I did mention at some point that they may have a potential positive, something then that it shows a potential positive, and that is that it shows a discontention with how things currently are, and that people do want to break out of the status quo, and people are somewhat inquisitive. Even if everything beyond that point completely fails, I feel that I need to commend people for wanting a change, and for wanting to think, and for wanting to break out of a cycle that they actually do recognize is violent towards them. Because capitalism is violent towards the people who create the capital, who work for the capital. Well, they'd like it to accumulate infinitely at the top, but that's impossible because we have finite resources, and capital cannot be built infinitely based on finite resources. So yeah, people see that something is fucky in the system, and they feel disgruntled and want a change, and there's nothing bad about it. But the thing is that because systems continuously, sometimes even purposefully, fail them, for example the education system, they don't have the tools or the knowledge to produce like accurate predictions or thoughts or statements or actions. So they operate based on what they do know. That's why I said I wouldn't call them gullible, because gullibility, I mean, yes, there are obviously people who just are gullible and will believe anything anyone tells them, but that's beside the point. The thing is that people are suffering under an oppressive system and want to break free, but lack the tools and believe what they hear because they are vulnerable, not because they are gullible. And on many occasions, these people, the people who believe conspiracy theories, are very smart and intelligent, just never had the chance to actually utilize their own skills and resources, their own intellect, to fully grasp the things that they are talking about. I'm going into more detail on conspiracy theories, especially regarding vaccines, in the vaccines video. So if you wanted to hear something about vaccines themselves and how that field is shaped, you will have to wait for that video or check it out. It's somewhere on the channel. And that one is a doozy. I found very interesting studies and papers and research regarding specifically conspiracy theories and vaccine hesitancy. So you'll have to wait for that. You'll have to watch it there. Otherwise, thank you for being here. And if you go to my linktree, you may find there something completely free and something that will most definitely benefit you. But you'll have to check that out for yourself. Thank you for watching. Cheers.